Very good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of Friday Drinks. We find you in extremely hot and, I am bothered. Hot and bothered.
You're not enjoying this weather?
No, I'm not. I think it's just too hot and I just need the rains to start raining. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I quite enjoy the heat. I quite enjoy the sunny days. I quite enjoy the cool evenings as well. I mean, instead of
the evenings
cold,
okay.
The evenings you're
okay,
not constantly fussing about having a jersey or jacket. You can actually, and Zimbabwe is actually set up in terms of like the coffee shops and bars and restaurants for to be outside.
But you actually can't be out. You actually can't be out for 5-10 minutes, more than 10 minutes. With the winter sun, you can actually be
you can be out all
afternoon or all evening. But now, just 5-10 minutes, even after 10 a.m. in the morning, it's already I can't handle it.
So but you look like you're spoiled for choice there, and I'm guessing that you have some interesting teas in front of you.
Beggars are not choosers.
Courtesy of Tia.
Ranga did think of us, and this is what he decided to buy. I think I would have had better choice if I had told him exactly what to buy, but he decided in his infinite wisdom. But as we said, beggars are not choosers. And this is from East Africa, so I'm going to have the Iringa tea from Iringa. So this is pure Moringa leaves, and it's from Iringa, which is, where Iringa is?
I have no idea.
It's actually in Tanzania.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what I'm going to have. And you've got a fancy bottle there.
Yeah. So I'm fortunate enough to have been on the right side of a rugby bet. And, actually 2 weeks ago, I bet on the All Blacks.
That they would lose.
That they would win. And I was going to double down and actually lose. I'd be down a couple of bottles. But thankfully, the guy who owed me the bottle from my win only pitched up after the game. After the box had won. So I did not have an opportunity to double down and lose everything. And the bottle survived the weekend, and here we are. So thank you, Blanding. This is the Singleton 15. It's a spicy, fruity, a little bit peaty, So I'm very grateful to have had the good fortune to make some money. Win a bottle, with from some honourable counterparties.
Okay, well done.
Yeah.
So today's an interesting one because it's just the two of us, so we can actually do a rabbit hole session. But I think I thought this would be particularly interesting and useful for a lot of people with what's actually happening between the US-Zim relations. So we can get deeper into those. But before we do that, I think 2 weeks ago we were all smiles and ululations when we were congratulating the government for actually doing the right thing, which is slashing fees and regulations. And a week ago, Minister Ziyambi, who was the Minister of Justice, actually came out and said, well, those were just good intentions. The law has to be made, and they're now deciding on the law, which I found very funny and very curious because usually we're slapped with SIs before we could even say anything. Like, it's already law.
Absolutely.
It's an SI and it's already law. Whereas this time around,
force of law,
and then this time around we get this schlep that actually they're working around the law.
Process,
It's a process, and they need to consult and they need to come up with the appropriate laws. And that's the last we've had of regulatory cuts and fees cuts. We haven't had anything now from 2 weeks. Because when they set it out, the idea was this thing was going to snowball into all the other departments, government departments and government ministries. But we haven't seen that. What's your comment on that? And I'm just going to give you enough time to maybe expand on what's actually happening with government. This is something that we were all excited about.
Yeah, look, so I just think, in large bureaucracies and, governments are typical of this. you have different departments with different agendas, and sometimes they're not always aligned. So you could tell from the nature of the announcements, firstly, they're coming from the Minister of Finance, that this is from a macroeconomic, capital allocation, finance sort of perspective, right? He's been interacting with the business community. They've been complaining about red tape, and they've taken this view to drive this initiative. But the actual regulations don't sit at Treasury. They sit at various other ministries, and perhaps the leadership and teams at the other ministries weren't as excited about driving these changes as Treasury was, because but it's not their idea, it's not their initiative, and actually it reduces the amount of power that they have in the market, because the regulations are less, and they're earning also less in terms of these fees.
But this is coming straight from the office of the president.
Yeah. So I'm not surprised. I think it's just kind of like if you think about it from a private sector perspective, you'll have finance executives often clashing with sales and marketing executives.
But this is coming from the office of the CEO.
Yes, yeah, but it doesn't change human nature. If in an organization power is being shifted from one department to another, or
but it's not like the Ministry of Finance is gaining anything. They're not.
No, they're not. But they're driving. Yeah. They're driving the initiative. It's their.
No, because it's their mandate, right? Because they're mandate, control. Yes. They're a control function.
Yes.
But the point is, this is actually coming from the CEO. So you're saying that there are departments and government ministries that are defying and disobeying the CEO.
Well, I wouldn't say defying or disobeying. I'm just saying they're perhaps not as excited about driving through these changes,
But previously,
which is why, because they haven't said, look, we're not going to make any changes. They're just saying, well, the law hasn't actually changed.
No, that's political. That's political rhetoric for we are not going to change.
Well, yeah, look, it's that's just the nature of bureaucracies. I think at the end of the day, you're correct to point out this is coming from the top, and ultimately, I think that's the outcome that we're going to witness. Obviously, there's a bit of squabbling, and the rollout isn't happening as quickly and seamlessly as we would like to see. But I think for big organizations, that's normal. It's just
no, it's not normal. That's why we're raising it, and it's not the way that the government has done these things before. Before, like I said,
when they're piling on regulations or fees, they're very aggressive, and
they're very aggressive. The SI comes, quicker than you can say, "Mama," and I just don't understand it. And this is their way. This is literally their way of saying nothing's going to change.
Well, I hope you're wrong. I hope
I do hope I'm wrong.
When we have this when we review where we are with these regulations and fees and penalties and that sort of thing, we'll be saying, well, it didn't happen as quickly as we would have liked, but it just happened.
Eventually happened. Okay.
So touch wood.
I sincerely hope I'm wrong. So anyway, I think we can move on. So perhaps let me just give a bit of background, and then we can then have a discussion around what's actually happening in America. I think that on Tuesday or so, we heard of HR 5300, and this is a bill that was introduced by Congressman Must. He's a congressman from Florida. And he introduced this bill, and it's got a raft of changes, foreign policy changes, that the Trump administration feels that these are the things that they need to change. So it's quite a hefty and thick proposal, and a lot of it has to do with freedom of speech, passports, and all sorts of things that Americans are interested in, and American policy to the rest of the world. But the curious thing is in there was a way in which America can deal with Zimbabwe, and primarily looking at ZIDERA, which was introduced in 2001, primarily after the farm invasions. I think that after that, that's when the relations between Zimbabwe and America strained. In fact, with the rest of the world, that's why they strained. And the idea was, what does this actually then mean for Zimbabwe? And I think for the longest, ZIDERA meant that we couldn't borrow from the multilateral organizations. Not that we were going to get any money anyway, but I think America then made a stance that we're just not going to approve, or we would veto any approval of the multilateral organizations lending to Zim. The other thing was we then had a number of institutions and a number of individuals that were then placed on a sanctions list. But that has changed. I think 20 years later has changed, and we saw in 2024, I believe, that they changed, and there were a raft of laws that were changed because then they were using executive orders. And the last executive order that was put, where a number of organizations and a number of people were actually taken off the sanctions list.
Yes, been shrinking.
They actually put them on a new list, which was the Mengistu list. And I think we now have about 11 individuals, or about 9 individuals, and about 2 organizations that are actually on the Mengistu list. Mengistu was a Russian chap involved in corruption and all sorts of things. So it's really named after him. And that's how they then put about a number of individuals from Zimbabwe on that particular list, primarily for corruption and human rights violations. And then, but ZIDERA stood because this was actually something that was passed by the House of Representatives and by Senate.
It's an act of Congress, yeah.
It's an act of Congress, so you can't use executive orders. But then what has happened now is this introduction by the Florida House of Representatives, where he's looking at changing the relations as far as ZIDERA is concerned. And the key thing that he has put, so it's struck off ZIDERA in its entirety, but to introduce something, a new framework, and the new framework, essentially the tenets that I got, and you could add or subtract if I haven't got it or if I haven't captured it correctly. But what he's saying, or what he's introducing, is the fact that they're willing to enter into new relations with Zimbabwe, and the only condition is that the farmers as far as what is outstanding, what they are owed, and this is just purely for improvements on the farm, that they will be paid out. And you cannot pay out with Zim treasuries or securities. It has to be muso, cash, real money, or some sort of arrangement that will lead to real money. And they've given, I think, about 12 months or so for this to happen. So that's, I think that's the framework. But before we get in, because we just need to make sure, and we need to inform our viewers, we are not journalists, so we're not out to push a particular narrative, but we're analysts, so we must do so with a little bit of caution, because I think that the narrative that a lot of people are pushing out there is that things have changed. Things have not changed. What has happened is there's this bill, and the nature of bills, especially in America, is that there's a lot of back and forth. And right now we're at the early stages of this bill. And what's likely to happen is eventually what is passed might be fundamentally different from what we see now. But I think that what they've given us is a framework in which discussions can happen. And I think that the government of Zimbabwe has, the next coming months to really impress upon what they think is the best situation or the best possible outcome for them. And it's also to the farmers and to the Zimbabweans at large that actually we can contribute to how this bill actually eventually plays out. I had a word, as I usually do, with the people that are concerned, or people that, so the farmers, for example. And the farmers, as usual, they're very much divided on the outcome of this. So you have farmers who believe in what the government of Zimbabwe is doing. So the government of Zimbabwe, what they have done so far, and these are the facts that we have, is they've paid interest on the 3.5 billion that is owing. So the 3.5 billion that is owing carries an interest rate of about 2%. And that 2% apparently has been paid, and there have been farmers who have received a check, depending on what they are owed. And then there is a bond. So the Zimbabwean government had said they would put up a bond to the farmers, which is a treasury of sort, and it would be between the years 2 and 10 years. So whatever your farm improvements were, let's say they were worth 200 or 300,000, they will give you a bond, an IOU from government, and this will be paid over 2 years. The tenure, the maturity tenure is between 2 years and 10 years. So there were those farmers that agreed to it, and there was farmers that disagreed with it. The farmers that have been pushing this, from what I understand, is that they do have a lobby in America, and these lobbyists have been pushing for, I think, part of what we see here, but it's divided. Like I said, there are those who, if you look at the wording that has come out with the congressman, with HR 5300, the wording is it cannot be securities, government securities, and it has to be inflation adjusted, and they want it paid out. So whatever arrangement they make with the IMF or whoever, they want theirs is never going to be discounted, and they want it paid out. So I don't know, I can then get into some details, but have I got the facts right as we sit here?
Look, I think for the most part you've captured it quite well. What I would add maybe is just, I'll zoom out just a little bit and give some geopolitical context. Earlier this year, the US president went on a trip to the Arab world. I think he visited Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. And one of the highlights of that trip was a speech that he gave in one of these countries where, to paraphrase him, he was making the point that it's not his job to lecture other countries about, how they manage their affairs. His job is to do deals that are in the best interest of the US, and ideally that are also win-win deals with the counterparty countries. And I thought that was quite remarkable, because if you look at the US's policy towards countries like Zim over the last several decades, they've taken a posture where they would lecture us about, human rights, about, all sorts of things regarding the internal affairs of our country. And I think this is a fundamental shift in the way U.S. foreign policy is run. It's much more pragmatic. It's much more transactional. And I think this is what's driving the creation of this bill, this intention to depart from ZIDERA and build a new framework. It's inspired by this attitude that the US should look at other countries as potential counterparties and seek mutual ground where the opportunities to do deals that are mutually beneficial. So I think that's a fundamental change in attitude from the Americans. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us as Zimbabweans to actually transcend.
But I also think that you need to be very clear that this is really coming from the right side of America, because the left wing of America, before we get to the left wing, I think there's something that the bill actually put out there, which heightens the political tensions between the left and the right, because he actually puts it out there that they feel very strongly that American foreign policy has been driven by the left, and that there are leftist ideas that are being pushed and not in the best interest of America. And they want to set out to control us. So I think this idea that this bill is bipartisan may not be so. Now, it's being pushed by a Republican. The good thing is the Republicans control the House and they control the Senate. So they might actually, pass it through purely based on their...
They've got the numbers.
They've got the numbers, so they might push it. But I think the idea is, even for Zimbabwe, for us to believe that this is bipartisan, I think that is stretching it. No, it's not bipartisan.
It's not bipartisan, but I think
it's extremely partisan.
But it doesn't change the nature of the opportunity. If we use this window of opportunity to, number one, remove us from sanctions, because one of the unfortunate unintended consequences of sanctions is that they create this perception, right? So they're just 11 individuals and companies on the ZIDERA or on the sanctions list, and the sanctions are very specific. They don't paint the whole country and everyone in it with the same brush. But this is, an informed position. Somebody allocating capital in Joburg or London or New York doesn't necessarily have the time and energy to get into the weeds of sanctions policy and understand that actually it's not the whole country that's under sanctions, it's just these 11 individuals and entities. So there's this cloud that hangs over us, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, that we're at some level a pariah state and there's certain risks associated with investing here. So if we can actually get that cloud removed, I think that in itself would be a significant win.
Definitely. I think. Yeah.
So even if there's a change in the U.S. administrations, in 2 years or in 6 years or whatever, if we take advantage of the opportunity that's in front of us and we have this sanctions cloud removed and we do other transactions where perhaps we restructure the national debt or get some big American corporates to invest here, I think we've done well. With our Look East policy, to the extent that you see transactions like Manise, that steel plant is now up and running. You've got the purchase of the lithium mine in near Koromonzi. That was a $400 million transaction. And just last week there was an announcement that there's a deal to fix NRZ with the Chinese. I think it's an Indian company, Jindal, that just got cabinet approval to do to refurbish, operate and transfer Hwange. So we've done deals with the Chinese in particular, and to a less extent the Indians, but we haven't really done anything with the Americans. And the Americans have as much capital, if not more, at their disposal. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to unlock some of it.
Yeah, I mean, capital has always been competition, so we benefit from competition, and we benefit from multilateral organizations rather than from the Chinese. Right now, Zimbabwe is getting these Chinese loans. When you look at the details, when you look at Afrexim Bank, they're upwards of 11% interest per annum, which is astronomical, and it's killing us. We're paying about $1 billion now in just interest payments on debt that's less than $3 billion. That is just ridiculous, and the penalties are just out of this world. Whereas if you were borrowing from the World Bank, for example, it comes at concessionary rates of 1-2%. If you had the Euro bond, that usually comes at a higher rate, but when we say higher rate, we mean 4-5%. Mm-hmm. So I think there's every reason for us to go there. So there's every reason to look at this as an opportunity. I think I definitely agree with you that this is a real opportunity that Zimbabwe has, because not so many countries would have their sanctions struck out. Cuba is not going to get its sanctions struck out. Russia is not. North Korea is not. But this is a particular opportunity for Zimbabwe. Just to back up a bit so that our audience are informed and so that we sort of help them understand what is actually going to happen. So the thing is, the bill right now is sitting with the Foreign Affairs Committee in Congress, and then after that it then has to go through Congress. So the number of revisions that will happen in the Foreign Affairs Committee, and then also with Congress, and then after Congress it has to go through Senate, and usually that's where a lot of deals die. It's in Senate. And if Zimbabwe is supposed to have a lobby, that is really where the lobby is supposed to be, is that we are supposed to lobby as much as we can in Senate. The thin line, or the thing about this bill is, while Zimbabwe is there, it's an omnibus bill. It's got a whole lot of other things that may not necessarily concern us as Zimbabwe.
Yep.
So we need to ensure that whatever is in that bill concerning Zimbabwe can be passed. But if the entire bill is struck out, then that's it for Zimbabwe. Then we just retain ZIDERA. So I tend to agree with you that we've got a window of opportunity, and what the Foreign Affairs Ministry or what the government of Zimbabwe should be doing right now is have people in Washington and lobbying, because the farmers have people in Washington and they're lobbying. That's why their issue is the center of this. And what we need to do is to make sure that by the time it gets passed, it's in a way that is friendly to Zimbabwe.
Absolutely.
And I think that what we're going to do, because we're interested in this, because we're all Zimbabweans, what we're going to do is, and we've already done so, it's to have the farmers here on our show, and to also have the American ambassador or the American embassy here on our show, and then maybe Foreign Affairs, if they're kind enough. It's always a bit of a problem to have them. But we've had the Minister of Foreign Affairs on our show before, Prof. So I'm sure we can sort of, and maybe this is our plea to Prof, that he can also join the discussions. And what we want to do is to see how far can we go in having an impact as far as this bill is concerned. And then it addresses the issues that Zimbabweans are concerned about. Right now, the only condition that's there, to me, as far as I'm concerned, is an easy condition, which is just pay the farmers. If you pay the farmers, then we get into the Adesina debt restructuring and all sorts. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think that's a low bar, and I think if we show commitment to settling that 3.5 billion, they are likely to be institutions on the global stage who would actually come to the party as partners to front the money for the farmers. In exchange for access to the Zim market and opportunities here. So I think, again, that's, it's an opportunity not just to clear this debt, but to actually have a conversation with serious capital allocators who could potentially, over and above helping us raise money to pay off this 3.5 billion, do other interesting transactions in the country.
Very, very, very true. That's interesting. So maybe we can also get into those details, because I think that our viewers will be quite interested to know if we can actually do debt restructuring, what it actually means, debt restructuring. And I'm just going to give the Paris debt that Zimbabwe owes to the Paris Club. So, we know our total international debt is about 21 billion, but it doesn't include a number of the Chinese debt. So if you're, and the Paris debt or debts and all sorts of debts that will eventually come when we do a proper audit, we're probably upwards of 30 billion, but it doesn't matter. Officially, we owe about 21 billion. But the most critical one is the Paris Club. And I'm using this as an example so that Zimbabweans are aware and why we need to do this deal, because I think that it actually helps Zimbabwe. So when you look at that, the total debt to the Paris Club creditors is about $4 billion. But do you know what the original principal amount was?
It's probably less than $1 billion.
Take a wild guess.
I'll call it 750 million.
So what was actually disbursed by the Paris Club since 1980 was actually 55 million.
Wow.
But we haven't paid.
And it's just been accumulating penalties and interest.
Penalties and interest. And remember,
compounding.
we're talking about interest rates of less than 2%.
Wow.
And it's just been compounding. 55 million has now turned to 4 billion.
That's
and
incredible.
This is 45 years or 40 years, 44 years, 45 years of independence. And this is what we have to show. that if we had just been servicing, and this is the point that we continuously are making to the government of Zimbabwe, right now we pay $1 billion in interest. Because now we're getting expensive debt.
I don't know that we're paying it, we're accumulating it.
We're accumulating. but that's the point.
Yeah.
That's the point, because you and I, in 20 years' time,
we'll still be on the hook.
We'll still be alive, and we'll be talking about how, do you remember those days where we used to pay, 20 years ago, we used to pay we used to accumulate $1 billion in interest. And not on the old debt. $1 billion, it's just the new debt. That we owe about maybe $3-4 billion, and we're paying penalties and interest rates of about $1 billion a year. That is what we've actually budgeted for, and this is something that we have to look back in our past and say, but guys, let's think about this. We owed the Paris Club 55 million. It's now 4 billion. But that's also the opportunity. The opportunity is, if we were to restructure a number of these things, so I think that the unpaid principal might stay intact, and that comes to about $1.3 billion. But you're potentially looking at about $3 billion being struck off. This is how you would do the deal. So that's about 70-75% written off. And if we do that, like penalties and arrears and stuff like that, if it's struck out, it gives us an opportunity to go back into the global market. Eurobonds, we've seen that with Rwanda, Kenya, Ghana, getting large amounts of money using the Eurobonds. And if we do that, then we are able to raise more money. If you look at Kenya, I always give an example of Kenya, because we used to be a bigger economy than Kenya.
In 1990,
even now, when you look at Kenya and Zimbabwe, in terms of exports, we export, not just export, but foreign currency
receipts. We generate more than Kenya.
We generate more than Kenya. But do you know what the import bill right now? The import cover is closer to 5 months, and it's closer to about, I think, $12 billion that they've accumulated in reserves. $12 billion. But part of it is because the receipts that they get from exporters are not used, because they're able to get money and borrow from Europe and everywhere else with these Euro bonds or the World Bank. Yep. So that's why we need it. Because right now the problem that we have with Zimbabwe is every bit of cent that comes in as foreign currency, we need it. We desperately need it. Government desperately needs it. I mean, I don't even understand why government is always after the exported dollar. They shouldn't. What they essentially need to do is to raise money using the international markets. And that's the opportunity that we have. That if we sort out our debt issue, then we open ourselves up to the international markets. Now, what's the thing that's now in between us and this new world where we can borrow? Is essentially just paying the farmers. And this is my hunch, and I'm quite interested to hear what you think. I think if the farmers are given $1 billion cash, and then the rest is a bond over 10 years, I think they will do a deal. And I think the Americans will be willing to accept that in the bill. What do you think?
I think that's plausible. I think $1 billion is a lot of money in the context of where they're coming from, where they've just had no value for the last 2 decades plus. But I also think that, because I tend to be a wee bit more optimistic than you are, I actually think that if we applied our minds and came up, pursued the right ideas and opportunities, we could actually raise the 3.5 billion. Even that number, $22 billion in terms of our national debt, in the context of global capital markets, this is literally trillions of dollars of debt capital out there. It's a drop in the ocean. right? The only reason, we have been our own worst enemy in terms of these debts that we have either not serviced or restructured. I think we have agency. It's incumbent on us to revisit each of those debts, whether it's the 3.5 billion that we owe the commercial farmers, or what we owe the Paris Club, and have a conversation to figure out how we might restructure them. I think there's an opportunity, and also, even before we started having this conversation about ZIDERA and the potential removal of this sanctions regime, I've seen, from my perch as a capital markets player, the attitude changing slightly when it comes to foreign money looking at Zim. So certainly, in the aftermath of one-to-one gauge, the attitude was just Zim is a no-go area. Okay, that's just it's a radioactive investment wasteland. You're not, it's just, please don't insult my intelligence by telling me about opportunities there. That was the attitude across the board. And yes, there's some, big institutions with very rigorous processes and governance issues that will not look at Zim at the moment, just at a macroeconomic level. But there's but what I've seen over the last few years is that they are, it used to just be what you would have previously described as buccaneer capital, right? That was interested in coming into Zim and picking up assets and, trying to get a return. But I think there's a class of capital that is a bit more structured and cleaner than buccaneer capital that is starting to have a look at Zim and say, hey, you know what, maybe...
Like, wait, give me a hint. I still don't think so. I think it's still buccaneering capital that's coming into...
So if you look at...
and contrast with Kenya, where you have Amazon, Google, Microsoft, that sort of capital that's now sitting in Nairobi.
If you look at a corporate like Jindal, that's basically going to refurbish, operate and transfer, I think number 1 to 6 at Hwange. That's a reasonably well-respected big Indian corporate, and
they're not investing. You see, that's the critical point. The critical point is if you're borrowing.
Well, they're deploying meaningful amounts of capital. They're going to deploy about $150
No, Zimbabwe is borrowing.
No.
They're not doing us a favor.
I don't know whether you looked at the details of the deal, which is
go ahead.
Which is why I was impressed by it.
Okay,
right.
Please go ahead.
So basically, what they're going to do. So it's a version of build, operate, transfer, right? Except that these power stations at Hwange exist already, but they are not working. They're defunct and they require meaningful amounts of capital to be refurbished. So what Jindal has agreed to do is to come through with a technical and financial muscle to refurbish these power stations, and they're not going to get paid by the government for this technical and financial investment that they're making. They're going to operate those power stations.
Is there a government of Zimbabwe guarantee?
That I'm not aware of.
I bet you there's a government of Zimbabwe guarantee. And that tells me it's not an open risk. See, if they were investors, I can understand all that. But the minute you have a government of Zimbabwe guarantee, then that's government borrowing. Yeah,
but okay, fine. So even if, and I'm willing to concede the point that there may be a government guarantee there. If you're in the audience and you're well informed on the details of this, please
help us.
Comment. But for the longest time, government of Zimbabwe guarantees aren't worth the paper that they're written on.
No, unless they're international,
right?
This is the problem we have.
But look, I mean, at a very high level, what Jindal has agreed to do is to come in, refurbish these furnaces. And operate them, right? So they're going to be selling power and getting paid, and once they recoup their investment, they then transfer to the state.
True. Okay.
Right? So that was unthinkable in 2016.
I want you to help me.
2015.
Okay, so Rufaro, I want you to help me.
Yeah.
So that you understand that they're not doing us a favor.
No, they're not doing us a favor.
No.
For them, it makes sense for us.
No, it actually makes sense more for them than it does for us. But let me give you an example. If Jindal was going into China, or it was going into Canada, and it was setting up a plant in Canada, would the government of Canada give them a guarantee. Or they'll be like, oh, you guys, Jindal, that's what you guys want to do? Take the risk. If this thing works out, fantastic.
If it blows up,
hey, guys, you tried.
Yeah.
But you come to Zimbabwe. The reason why they come to Zimbabwe and deploy this capital is because, first of all, the interest rates are astronomical. They're probably, if you add in the fees and everything and the insurance, it's probably upwards of 20%. And then because we are not clever at negotiating these deals, we give them these government guarantees.
Well, look, like I said, it's an open question.
Literally what you're saying to the guy is he's going to bring in his capital, but he's bringing in his capital at 20% per annum. He's taking equity-like risk, and he's going to get his money. But just in case he doesn't get his money, he can take the paper, the government guarantee, to Treasury, and he will still get his money. And if government of Zimbabwe cannot pay, he will continue to penalize us. That's how you take a debt worth 55 million.
And it becomes 4 billion.
And it becomes 4 billion.
Yeah.
It's because you don't really understand that Jindal is not doing you a favor at all. What should happen is if these guys like the opportunity, they see the opportunity, they think they can make money out of the opportunity. The only thing that government of Zimbabwe needs to do is to say, guys, you can operate and you can charge whatever you want. If you're going to charge, $2 a kilowatt hour, that's you. If somebody is willing and happy to pay $2 a kilowatt hour, that's you. Take the risk. And
I think we're on the same page, right? I think, in an ideal world, the state would not be negotiating these sort of deals. They would just be a referee. Anybody who wants to set up a power plant, more power to you. Anybody who wants to build transmission infrastructure and distribution infrastructure, more power to you. These are the rules. Please stick to them, right? I think, as a libertarian, my worldview is the government shouldn't be a player in these sort of transactions. But this is where we are, right? In fact, it reminds me of another deal that was signed during the GNU. I don't know whether you remember the SR deal for Cisco Steel. That was a $750 million deal. And then it included some mineral rights to, there's an iron mine somewhere near where Cisco is. I think it's Red Cliff.
Yeah.
And sometime after the deal was signed, someone in the bureaucracy had this bright idea that actually, we were too generous in throwing in Red Cliff. Let's take it out. And then steel prices blew up, and SR, effectively had dodged a bullet because they were able to walk away from this deal because we obviously reneged on the material part of it. And yeah, so look, I'm
Can I give you another fantastic example?
Yeah.
Is I think it was Prospect lithium mine that was bought by the Chinese for 400 million. Government had nothing to do with it, right? But when prices went down, now if government had given a guarantee at those ridiculous high prices, and then prices have come down, it means the Chinese have a claim on government.
Yeah, no, but again, but actually, that's another good transaction where
exactly, that's a fantastic.
That's $380 million.
Fantastic transaction for Zimbabweans
of new investment into Zim, which would not have happened. I would, posit this would not have happened in 2015 or 2016. So I think the attitude towards Zim was in global capital markets has been mellowing.
Do you think that government actually understands that actually the reason why we're talking about this and we're talking about the US and these are things that they are within the wherewithal and they can change, and it's not a cost to the Zimbabwean taxpayer at all. Yet they give willy-nilly these government guarantees.
Look, I think
they think if somebody says, "Oh, I'm willing to sort out NRZ," and they're like, "Wow, this guy has got billions and he can do so. Just give him the guarantee. It doesn't matter." That's how 55 million turns to $4 billion US.
Yeah. Look,
whereas what government should do in our world is, just be a referee. Just make sure you make the environment conducive enough, people will come and they will buy in ours.
They'll take risk.
And they will take the risk and they will make it work. And if it doesn't work, you will commiserate with them, give them a pat on the back and say, you know what, well done, guys, but unfortunately, no business.
It didn't work out. It's like,
it didn't work out.
It's like with
whereas this time around, you know what, the Chinese, it's like they're betting on these deals not working. Because they know that the minute it doesn't work, you just run back to government and you say, you know what, I've got a guarantee. And it's not you, the businessman, who's doing the running around. You then give it to the president of China, depending on, the amount it is. And this is how Zambia got into a problem. Because Zambia thought they were dealing with Rufaro and Tinashe. The Chinese version of Rufaro and Tinashe. But because it was now a government guarantee, it's now government to government. Now you have a bureaucrat coming from China and saying, but you guys, you know that you owe us money. And he's saying you owe us money. He's not saying you owe Tinashe and Rufaro money. You owe the Chinese government because there's this guarantee that you gave.
At a bilateral national level.
At a bilateral national level. And we've now come to get our pound of flesh. And guess what happened with the Zambians? That's what happens.
Blew up, didn't it?
Yeah, in Nepal as well. And in Zimbabwe, there's this affinity to just be writing off these government guarantees and not understanding that is where our problem is. Why should Afrexim Bank come to Zimbabwe and come with a government guarantee or sort? You know that Afrexim Bank, when they were coming to Zimbabwe, it was bank to bank. They used to give CBZ, Trust, Interfin. That's where the risk sat. Now you know where the risk sits? At RBZ, at government level. Government shouldn't even be given these guarantees. They should just say purely, we're here to create a conducive environment. If the conducive environment is there, you can charge whatever you want. And you know what, guys? Good luck.
Absolutely. Look, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that, my perspective is we're coming from a very command and control government mindset. And I think the government is very slowly pivoting to being more market friendly. So for you and me, it's quite frustrating when we see the rate of change and how much money we're leaving on the table, because we understand the potential. We understand what could be done in an ideal world, and we are so far from that. But the reality on the ground is, these guys are not going to leap from being, from socialist command control ideology to libertarian ideology in one fell swoop. They're going to take baby steps and hopefully end up where you and I are. And so, which is why I actually think there's an opportunity, because if this administration that's changing foreign policy in the US had come in 2017 with that exact same attitude, and to 2016, 2015 with this exact same proposal and attitude, I don't think they would have found a willing counterparty on the Zimbabwean end. Whereas today, I'm optimistic that a deal can actually be done.
Do you think that it's with the Zimbabweans, or it's actually with the Trump administration? That the Trump administration doesn't have the ancient history of why ZIDERA was there, and what they essentially want is to just get a deal done and move on. Commercial diplomacy, as they say.
Absolutely, I think certainly that's the material change from where I'm sitting. But I also think that in as much as we have lots of frustration and gripes about how business friendly our current government is, I think that compared to where we were in 2015, 2016, we're much more business friendly.
I tend to agree and disagree with you at the same time, if there ever was such a thing. So I tend to agree with you that definitely the current administration is nowhere near where Mugabe was. I think for Mugabe, it would just he wouldn't even recognize the off-ramp.
Yeah.
He he would just continue moving, and
Yes.
he would not realize that actually, he's just been given an off-ramp. But I think that these guys are able to recognize the off-ramp, but I think that they are unable to take advantage of it, partly because that's the nature of our politics in Zimbabwe, that it just moves very slowly, and for it to move, you need consensus or sort. And this term called the Politburo, that's a communist.
Yeah,
it's quite unlike the Chinese. The Chinese, I think it's 7 people, 6 people.
Oh, the standing committee. Yeah, it's they've got a standing committee of 7.
7 people sitting around, and they all are of similar sort of mindset. Whereas when you look at the ZANU-PF Politburo, if you think about it, you have a guy who's just a peasant farmer, and then you have a guy who's purportedly a billionaire, and they're still in the same room, and they're supposed to decide what's actually happening in the US and what our policy is. And it must be consensus driven. And we've seen the problem with that as far as the ANC government is concerned, because everything has to be consensus. You know what consensus means in a
It means things move very slowly.
In a communist party. So there's consensus driven in a bureaucracy. Consensus driven in a bureaucracy means the majority, right? It doesn't mean that everybody has to agree. But in a communist party, it's only consensus when everyone has come round. So I must continuously lobby you, even when you disagree, until you come around for us to actually move. And that is why Cyril doesn't move. It's because he has to have that 100% consensus. And that's how communist parties work. And that's why eventually they become, tyrannical. And you have a dictator because they're like, you know what, this thing is just actually not moving. Let's just get things going. So I think that Zimbabweans, and that's why we're trying to do, this is the sort of, advocacy work that we're trying to do, is that to realize the moment. To realize that actually we have once in a lifetime opportunity. That Trump is gone in 3 years' time. And after Trump, I don't think it's going to be the same America. Are we not better off with
doing a deal? Yeah.
Doing a deal, ZIDERA is out, then we don't do a deal, and ZIDERA is there, and this thing will be there, not just for our lifetime, but for our kids' lifetime.
Look, I hear you, but I'm going to push back. I think that the current government actually is alive to the opportunity and might actually be equal to the task. Because remember, we had this strong debate several months or a couple of years ago when we were just talking about the 3.5 billion owed to the disenfranchised, commercial farmers. At a philosophical level, should we be paying this amount at all? Why are we on the hook for these improvements and that sort of thing? And one of the points that you made that I thought was quite important was that it doesn't matter. Let's not moralize, right? Are we going to be better off if we pay this 3.5 billion as a country? In terms of our relations with the West, who control meaningful amounts of capital. And the answer unequivocally is yes, we're going to be better off, right? So, and, this agreement to be on the hook for 3.5 billion to the, commercial farmers, it would never have happened under Mugabe, right?
Not at all.
And so.
No, fair point.
So I think there's a recognition in the current government that, we let's not be moralistic, let's not be too idealistic about history, let's be pragmatic. Let's move forward.
But then what's your answer to the Adesina process that's been... In fact, Adesina is no longer there. And that was the champion. That's not the thing that Zimbabweans... We don't realize, what the government of Zimbabwe doesn't realize, that Adesina was a champion for Zimbabwe. It's a guy who put his hand out when he shouldn't have.
Yeah, look, so
because he's the president of the African Development Bank. He's got 54 countries, and he's actually Nigerian. And I think at some point he spent his time in Zimbabwe.
Yep.
So he just generally likes Zimbabwe. So he says, okay, give me that file. Give me that Zimbabwean file. He looks at the Zimbabwean file and he says, I think I'm going to help them. I'm going to be the Zimbabwean champion, debt restructuring champion. He's no longer there. we missed that opportunity.
So my
4
problem-
years, and we missed that opportunity. What's your reply to that?
So when I think about the President Chisano,
Adesina, I think Chisano is always there, but
Adesina process.
Yeah.
To me, the reason why I was always skeptical, and rather gloomy about its chances of success was because of all of the non-financial, non-business political language associated with that process. So there was all this. We want to see. There was a litany of political reform that they wanted to see happen.
But it's also. Are you saying there was anything wrong with that?
So hear me
governance,
out.
The governance issues.
Hear me out, right? So in an ideal world, you want, I think it's perfectly okay to have all of these non-financial conditions attached to packages and that sort of thing. But I think from a pragmatic statement, like if you understand Zimbabwean history, even from your perspective, right, what was the probability that you would see an embrace of all of those reforms?
Well, those reforms are always going to be there.
No, but if you look at what we...
So even with ZIDERA, it's not that the human rights, the governance issues are going. They're not going away.
But they're not. So first and foremost,
they're not going away. It's you better deal with it today.
I think, but you actually pointed out that with this new initiative to get rid of ZIDERA, what's front and center is this 3.5 billion.
Yeah, right? But then immediately after that,
right? And I think that
it's not like
my best guess.
You get rid of that, then everything flows. No, immediately after that, it's like, these are the 4 pillars that you guys need. Of the 4 pillars, you've solved one. Mm-hmm. There are these 3 pillars.
My best guess is that they're not going to be as fussy about those 3 pillars if they feel that they can do business deals.
I disagree.
So look.
But let's hear what the audience thinks.
I could be wrong, but that's what I think. I think that I think
we live in a world now where, and remember the ambassador actually clearly stated this. This is the US ambassador to Zim. That Ambassador Tremont, she made it very clear that human rights are still a big issue. Governance is still
no. So diplomats are bound to make that case.
And this was coming from Senator Rubio.
But
so this is not coming from her. She is actually relaying these.
No, I hear you.
So I do not think that the Trump administration
all that I'm saying is
will just be purely commercial. I think that these needs and these requirements that will still be front and center. And the question I have for you is, why do you have a problem with it? Because these issues are also so true of Rwanda, of Kenya, of South Africa. Why shouldn't they be true
look,
of Zimbabwe?
I'm indifferent. I'm analyzing this dispassionately, right? So all I'm simply saying is...
So you would put money into Zim knowing fully well that there's misgovernance of money and that this money, you're never going to get it back. Because those are the issues that they're talking about. They're talking about transparency. They're talking about...
So let me put it this way.
Bureaucratic integrity.
Let me put it this way, right? To some extent, the DRC is a war zone, right? Mm-hmm. But their capacity to unlock capital from global markets is orders of magnitude better than ours. Right, people will actually go to Lubumbashi, go to Kinshasa, explore business opportunities there, and invest hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. Notwithstanding all the issues there, right? And I'm not saying, it's okay that they have all these issues. The point I'm simply trying to make is that money is not moralistic. Capital is not moralistic. People look at risk and they look at return.
I think you're making a fundamental mistake. So I'm not going to use the DRC, but to a very large extent, the way the governance around money is done in the DRC, as far as government is concerned, is actually far better than Zimbabwe. But I want to give you a very stark example where I want to show you that there is. And I'm not going to say he's a dictator, but he's won elections with astronomical numbers, over 90%. Guy wins elections over 90%. I'm not saying whether it's free or not, but this guy, everybody loves him in his country. But the way he runs his governance around his finances is transparent. And the IMF has written a report, a glowing report, about how they actually manage their finances. And I think that's what our creditors are asking for. By the way, the country I have in mind is not Rwanda. I know a lot of people would argue it's Rwanda, but it's actually Uganda. Right? You've got a guy, Museveni, who's been there for over 30 years or almost 40 years. So I think he got into power in 86 or so. And the guy knows how to run his finances.
So this is the point. So we're not in disagreement, Tinashe.
No, all I'm saying is what we have.
Capital doesn't care about the politics. They care about.
Capital does care about the politics. And if you're saying that, capital does care about the politics. But I think that it's to the level that they do care, because there is what we term political risk. The political risk in Uganda is fundamentally less than the political risk in Zimbabwe, because there's uncertainty, there's change of policy, and a whole lot of issues. Now, when you're ticking boxes, if your human rights issues, if you're overweight in all the other issues, and then you have a problem with your human rights, you find that on the weighted average, you're still in a pass. It doesn't mean that we don't like what you're doing, or we like what you're doing as far as human rights is concerned. And I think that there are serious human rights issues in Uganda. But the fact that this guy, he runs his government well, levels of corruption are not as much as we find in Zimbabwe. And he actually, his budget deficits and things like that and money printing, he actually does a fairly good job. He has brought some sort of political certainty. Yes, the opposition guy, his house gets shot at once in a while. Yeah, those are issues. But on balance, the guy is seen to be far better. And that's how capital will assess it. That's how credit risk will assess it. And say, Uganda could actually have a bond. He's still paying his IMF bills. Yeah, he's still paying his World Bank bills.
So we're not in disagreement, right? So our challenge here is that from a policy action standpoint, we're inconsistent, we're chopping and changing. We have a long, well-documented history of making promises and breaking them, right? This is just in the world of economic policy, right? And that's the challenge, right? That's what's holding back capital, right? It's not because they care about these other issues strongly, right?
I'm saying they do.
Primarily, what they're saying is, hey, you know what? If you're saying this is your currency regime, and that has a material impact on my risk-adjusted rate of return, and you guys, you can't give me comfort that over the next 5 years or the lifetime of my investment, there's not going to be a currency event that wipes me out. That at that level.
Okay, so let's put it this way. If you have four things that you're looking at, and human rights, it's 25%, and then macroeconomic management, it's another 25%. And then governance, just general bureaucratic governance, corruption, blah, 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 is another 25%. And then paying the white farmers is another 25%. Now, if you are scoring fairly decently around...
On the 75. Then people, some capital is just going to ignore the other 25%, right?
No, they won't ignore. They will mark you down, but they will say, when we look at it, they will price it in.
Exactly.
That's the point. Yeah. They will price it in, but they will say you're a pass. Now, if you're doing badly at all factors, you know what is more pronounced? It's the human rights issues. When you're doing, because human rights affect almost every individual. The government, most people in Uganda don't know who the central bank governor is.
And they probably don't care.
And they don't care. Yeah. So the IMF comes and he says, you know what, we actually don't like Museveni, but you know what, he's actually doing a fantastic job as far as his finances are concerned. You know, we don't like this guy, but as far as corruption is concerned, hey, he's not like Zimbabwe. You know, those Zimbabweans. You know,
Yeah,
hey,
so I think so
as far as the Indians are concerned, because remember they threw out the Indians. The guy actually did something about it. Yeah. So when we look at it, yes, human rights, he may not be as favorable as what the world would want. But they're saying, you know, we can't look at this thing in isolation. We must look at this thing holistically. And holistically, it's a pass. Give him the money. And unfortunately, Zimbabwe, we are a fail on most things. If you look at corruption, and the only reason why we're talking about the white farmers is because we're actually saying that's a big, huge win. But it doesn't mean that we solved everything. Where I agree with you is, okay, we've got 4 things. Why don't we sort out 1, 2, and 3 that are ideally
low hanging fruit, because it's in everybody's interest.
It's in everybody's.
If the economy is thriving, right? It's in the government's interests, it's in the business community's interests, it's in foreign investors, it's in everybody's interest if the economy is thriving. Absolutely. And this is the point that I always make, and I try to detach it from these other, from geopolitics to some extent, to say, look, you know, at the end of the day, and you know, I referenced the Trump administration's trip to the Middle East. If you think about them in terms of societal values like democracy and human rights and that sort of thing, the US is very different from Qatar or Saudi Arabia, right? But President Trump was able to travel there and say, hey, you know what, I'm not here to lecture you about how to organize your society.
Fair enough.
Right?
Fair enough.
I'm here to look for deals that are good for America, right? And so and if you project that attitude to potential deals between the US and Zim, right? It's the same logic applies, right? In an ideal world, we check all the boxes.
But you must not be doing egregious stuff. I mean, we've seen what happened with the South Africans, because for all intents and purposes, South Africa runs, you know, a very, you know, free society sort of, and they do uphold human rights. But there's this one thing: they have a relationship with Iran, and that's a deal breaker as far as America is concerned. So we also need to be very careful about who we're friends with. Before we go any further, I think it's time to say thank you very much for joining us. It's always great. It's always wonderful to catch up on a Friday.
Yes. Hopefully, I think Zia will be around next episode to moderate some of the madness that happens.
Well, it was a rabbit hole. It was a rabbit hole session.
You and me.
Yeah. It was a rabbit hole session. So what it generally means to new viewers who may not know or may not understand our rabbit hole sessions, but this is just really where we go on a tangent and we just see how far it takes us. And I think that, but what it does, it then allows us to really get into the nuts and bolts of issues. And I think that the US-Zim relations are at a critical point. We certainly do see it as a big opportunity.
Yeah, and I think it's a huge opportunity.
We hope that Zimbabwe takes advantage of this opportunity. As we just to reiterate, the bill right now is with the committee. It's still at the first stages, which means that we've got an important thing where we can do. If we were in America, we would have said, you know, tweet or write or email directly to the senator. But even we can still do that, actually, as Zimbabweans. We can actually write directly to the senator and to the committee and say, these are the issues, these are the things that we think you need to consider. I think it's the first step. Americans have done the first step. I think that they need feedback from us to give them a holistic idea. My view is let's put it at $1 billion. Let's not say let's pay the farmers 3.5 immediately. Zimbabwe is a poor state, as we know. But I think that $1 billion is something that we can, just to show that we are serious about it.
Good faith payment.
It's a good faith payment, and that should be enough to get rid of ZIDERA, and then we can go on to the other details and the other issues, especially with the debt restructuring. And as we've clearly stated out, if you look at Nigeria, Ghana, they had 70% of their debt forgiven. If 70% of our debt is forgiven, then, you know, you get...
we're off to the races.
Off to the races.
Yeah.
Off to the races. And we think that that's the biggest opportunity that Zimbabwe has. Otherwise, have yourself a wonderful evening and a great weekend. Cheers.
Cheers.